Turns out it's very difficult to hold an election in wartime conditions where literally hundreds of thousands of fighting-age men are still on the front lines.
Wow, I never thought I'd hear Ben Shapiro talking like this. What is this new paradigm? The United States has used this amazing new technology to send you Donald Trump's message. He has done a screenshot of Donald Trump's tweet and then posted it to himself. Donald Trump tweeted this himself. So JD Vance, what are you doing? You could have just retweeted. It's been a feature since day one. I mean, I feel like you're sniping the president here. Instead of just retweeting him, you had to post it yourself. Did you want to get the extra clicks and views? God damn, it's just so fucked up when you see that. You know, there's so many times when I'm on Twitter and I'm like, that's a meme that I made, and you could have retweeted it, but no, you had to right click save, and oh, you went the extra mile to take my signature out of it, and then didn't. You know, that doesn't really happen that often, but you know, it's good practice. You should be doing retweets. You should be helping out your president. He is your president after all. So anyways, JD Vance tweets the real Donald Trump, who truths the following statement. Think of it. A modern, successful comedian, Vladimir Zelensky, talked the United States of America into spending $350 billion to go to war that couldn't be won and never had to start, but a war that he, without the US and Trump, will never be able to settle. Why all caps? Why quotation marks? I don't think you know what either means. Why are so many of these fools in power? Trump. The United States has spent $200 billion more than Europe, and Europe's money is guaranteed, while the United States will get nothing back. Why didn't sleepy Joe Biden demand equalization? Is that this war is far more important to Europe than it is to us. We have a big, beautiful ocean, capital, as separation. On top of this, so we're separated by water, so it's not really our concern. On top of this, Zelensky admits that half the money we sent to him is missing, quotation marks, capital. He refuses to have elections, is very low in Ukrainian polls, and the only thing he was good at is playing Biden like a fiddle. Like a fiddle. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he is not going to have a country left. In the meantime, we are successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia, something I'll admit only Trump, and the Trump administration can do. Biden never tried. Europe has failed to bring peace, and Zelensky probably wants to give the gravy train going. I love Ukraine, but Zelensky has done a terrible job. His country is shattered, and millions have unnecessarily died. And so it continues. So that was the statement from the President of the United States. Not entirely sure what he was going for here, but let's get a cipher. Relations between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and U.S. President Donald Trump deteriorated rapidly. Wednesday, Zelensky said Trump was living in a Russian-made disinformation space. Trump responded by calling Zelensky a dictator without elections. Zelensky said that he respected the U.S. leader. He would like Trump's team to be more truthful. He made the comment shortly before he was expected to meet with Keith Kellogg, the U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine and Russia, who arrived in Kyiv on Wednesday. Kellogg will meet Zelensky and the military commanders as the U.S. shifts this policy away from years of trying to isolate Russia with President Vladimir Putin. American and Russian diplomats met in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia on Tuesday in talks that sidelined Ukraine with European officials. Trump suggested on Tuesday that Kyiv was to blame for the war, which enters its fourth year next week. Russia's full-scale invasion began on February 24th, 2022. In comments to reporters on Tuesday, Trump said, "You've been there for 3 years," referring to concerns that Ukraine had been excluded from talks with Russia and the U.S. "You should have never have started it. You could have made a deal," Trump said. Trump's comments have also vexed some European officials. "We don't understand the logic very well," French government spokesman Sophie Primus told reporters, describing the diverse, varied, and often incomprehensible comments from President Trump. French President Emmanuel Macron was to hold a video conference on Ukraine later Wednesday from leaders of more than 15 countries, mostly European nations, with the aim of gathering all partners interested in peace and security on the continent, his office said. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said Wednesday he would be participating in the Macron-led conference. No video for me? Well, see, this is why you're getting defunded, CBC. Let's turn to Ben Shapiro. What does he got to say?
So here's President Trump saying some stuff about Ukraine. Again, I have some moral objections to the stuff that he is saying about Ukraine.
Oh, you pissed off Ben Shapiro. That's wild.
Ukraine here, because I don't think that it is true. So, for example, At one point during this press conference, he made the signally false statement that Ukraine started the war. This is not true. Ukraine absolutely did not start the war. You can argue with Ukrainian policy toward both Europe and Russia over the period 2013 to 2022. But Russia invaded a sovereign country and tried to take Kyiv and has killed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. Here's President Trump suggesting sort of the opposite, that somehow Ukraine is the problem here.
Yeah, broken clocks can be correct twice a day.
Today I heard, oh, well, we weren't invited. Well, you've been there for 3 years. You should have ended it 3 years. You should have never started it. You could have made a deal. I could have made a deal for Ukraine that would have given them almost all of the land, everything, almost all of the land.
Yeah, Ben Shapiro has fallen. Oh no, first they got GameStop, now they got Ben Shapiro. Wokeness is infecting the nation.
And no people would have been killed, and no city would have been demolished, and not one dome would have been knocked down. But they chose not to do it that way. And President Biden, in all fairness, he doesn't have a clue.
Okay, so President Trump there saying Ukraine never should have started it. Ukraine did not, in fact, start it. You can blame them for not coming to the table sooner. You can say that a deal should have been taken sooner. I've said that myself. But Ukraine absolutely did not start the war, and Russia should have stopped this war at any point. President Trump then continued by suggesting that he wants elections in Ukraine. This has been a demand of the Russians, mainly because the Russians wish to intervene in that election. It turns out it's very difficult to hold an election in wartime conditions where literally hundreds of thousands of fighting-age men are still on the front lines.
Wow, I never thought I'd hear Ben Shapiro talking like this. What is this new paradigm?
In Ukraine. That is a situation rife for election manipulation by the Russians, who, of course, are bordering on Ukraine and have many agents inside Ukraine.
What's Shapiro's angle? Okay, so you got to understand here that the United States has obviously never really, I think, fully accepted the post, Cold War era. They were just way too indoctrinated with McCarthyism and have always consistently seen Russia as a, easy target or enemy, or at least frenemy at the best of times. Even though that the shock doctrine policies of the United States effectively did destabilize and allow Russia to carve out the current paradigm that it has today, which is actually pretty similar to what's happening in the United States, where you have a lot of rich oligarchs turning it into a gangster state run by the extreme wealthy and rich. I mean, Americans, you might not know anything about that going down or what that's like. So that dynamic going into this, which is, yes, very clearly an illegal invasion by Russia into sovereign Ukrainian territory. What Ben is referring to is that there's an argument that was made for a long time that, and it was the exact same one that the Russians used to justify their invasion, was that they had no choice. That the potential for Ukraine to join NATO means that NATO forces are directly at their doorstep. This has made them have to do a preemptive measure, such as annexing Crimea, and that's the reason why they were doing what they were doing. This was a defensive measure, which is often what aggressive nations or imperial nations do. They do so under the guise of or the pretense of defense, right? That's usually the sales pitch. It's that we're not doing this because we're trying to invade another nation. We're doing this defensively because if we don't do this preemptively, we're going to be potentially threatened by the encroachment of the ever-expanding and growing NATO alliance that seems to be now at our doorstep. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. It doesn't make the invasion any less illegal, and it doesn't make them trying to annex another country or another part of a country any less wrong, right? Just fundamentally at its own principles. They don't ever apply these kind of rules or these regulations or just international, I would say, laws to say what Israel is consistently doing to Palestine. That's completely the opposite, actually. That's because it happens to be that the Palestinians are Hamas, even if Hamas is not in power in the West Bank, but still they are all Hamas, and they need to be stopped, and they need to be completely bombed and obliterated to prevent those terrorists from ever having any kind of power. So in that case, that is totally different, the exact opposite. That's why this whole thing kind of like is really hard to square. If you're an American, if you're like a good American liberal who's like, it makes sense to me, Russia invaded Ukraine, and as a result of it, Ukrainians are defending their territory. And so, as an ally to Ukraine, we are now going to be sending them hundreds of billions of dollars worth of weaponry. That's it. Just circle gets the square. It makes sense. I can compute this. I can process the situation in my mind and have it all make sense. And also for the military-industrial complex, ooh, was this ever a beautiful moment for them, because they get to not only sell and produce tons and tons of armaments. They got rid of a lot of, I think initially, the initial arms that were sent from the US to Ukraine were old stockpiles, so they were able to, send off a lot of old weaponry that they had, while simultaneously the military-industrial complex gets to manufacture a whole bunch of new weapons to replace and, fill up the US stockpiles once again with shiny new weapons and missiles and bombs and stuff like that. Well, at the same time, you get to weaken what you see as an enemy, which happens to be Russia, without having to sacrifice American lives. It could be Ukrainian lives that are on the front lines that are having to die, whereas from the Ukrainian perspective, this is just literally people trying to defend their homeland against an imperial force and invader, which happens to be Russia. Now, that dynamic is kind of being thrown askew for a person like Ben Shapiro. He's in a really tough spot. This is an odd one, because there is definitely kind of like two separate schools of thought amongst the right. There is the right war hawks and the neocon kind of side of things, of which Donald Trump has actually filled his cabinet with a few of them, who, yes, still see this old dynamic in the same way that Democratic war hawks see this old dynamic. And it makes sense to them. We can weaken Russia. We don't have to sacrifice American lives. We can provide vast armaments and weaponry for this, while simultaneously there's another side of the right that are very, very nationalistic, and they want to separate completely from helping other countries, Israel being the exception. Why is it always Israel? I don't understand that part. Like, if you want to tell me or try to sell me on the idea that there's this kind of like, oh no, these are, the new wave, the next kind of, the Vivek Ramaswamy style conservatives, they're way more interested in just building up nationalism domestically, which really just means targeting vulnerable communities, minorities, immigrants, LGBTQ plus people. But at the same time, they're less interested in the geopolitical imperialism of the United States. That's the other side. So we've got this little branch between these two wings. Ben Shapiro, I guess, finds himself in the old school one, and in that he's confused. I know that was a very long TLDR to explain it, but I'm just trying to explain the Shapiro brain here, where he's kind of in a position where he's like, okay, look, I don't want to say anything bad about Trump. Trump is daddy, all right, traddy or whatever you want to call him. But at the same time, this is awkward. It's an awkward moment for all of us, and I can say it, all right? I'm going to be one of the few people who's proud to say that he's wrong.
As well.
Wait, was that the end?
So here's President Trump.
Dome would have been knocked down.
This war at any point. President Trump then continued by suggesting that he wants elections in Ukraine. This has been a demand of the Russians, mainly because the Russians wish to intervene in that election. It turns out it's very difficult to hold an election in wartime conditions where literally hundreds of thousands of fighting-age men are still on the front lines in Ukraine. That is a situation rife for election manipulation by the Russians, who, of course, are bordering on Ukraine and have many agents inside Ukraine as well.
Okay, that was the end. All right. Well, Ben disagrees. Interesting. Ukraine's territorial integrity is non-negotiable for Turkey, Erdogan says. Turkish President Erdogan said Tuesday Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty are non-negotiable for Turkey, as Ankara positions itself as a potential host for the talks between Russia, Ukraine, and the United States. Like, my biggest thing with this is that these talks that are taking place with Donald Trump right now are essentially between the United States and Russia, not allowing Ukraine to really have a voice, which seems fucked, because you're essentially talking about a country that isn't really getting to be part of the end of war negotiations. Those negotiations are directly going to impact their land. It's going to be like, obviously Russia, I think, is going to propose, we believe that we are entitled to, this much territory. The majority of the population has already voted to annex that region. And you can certainly say that the people who are in there and that vote is certainly not what I would consider to be a fair election, to say the very least. But that's going to be most likely what Russia brings to the table, that they are entitled to this region and this much percentage of land, thereby annexing it and increasing the territorial expansion of Russia. And at the same time, Ukraine simply has to accept that, which is something that, again, for I think the average Ukrainian, I can't speak because I'm not Ukrainian myself, but I imagine that's a terrible proposition to know that after 4 years of having schools, hospitals bombed, endless amounts of war crimes, terrible atrocities committed against your people, suddenly it's like, well, yes, and the end conclusion to all of this is going to be that a certain percentage of Ukraine is now becoming Russian territory, and that might also include the already, highly contested annexation of Crimea, which, again, for the average Ukrainian, I think would probably be a pretty horrifying proposition, especially one in which, if you don't have any direct ability to negotiate on this, Fox News anchor repeats Trump's claims about Zelensky.
Trump says he could meet with Vladimir Putin before the end of February. Joining me now is the head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, the CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, Sir Bill Browder. Bill, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here. You've had plenty of run-ins with Vladimir Putin. Give us your reaction to all of this.
Well, Vladimir Putin, so my run-ins with Vladimir Putin was
I can't make it any louder, by the way, otherwise I would.
he murdered my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, and a bunch of other people, and he's been chasing me around the world ever since with death threats and so on.
I gotta be honest, that's one hell of a cold open. I don't often do interviews for like, so Lance, you do the Serfs and then this independent media and then comedy on the internet. What do you have to say about this position and this current story? Well, I'd like to start by saying that the person we're talking about murdered my lawyer. That's not something I've ever been able to even think about.
And so I know Vladimir Putin very well, and he's a very bad guy, a man who shouldn't be trusted. And so when I'm watching this whole thing playing itself out, I'm thinking to myself that we need to be more supportive of Ukraine, who are the victims, and a little bit less chummy with Putin, who is the aggressor in this whole situation. I find that at the end of the day, Putin could end this war in right this minute by just stopping. That's the thing. Ukraine is defending, Putin's attacking, and he could stop. And so that's what we should be pushing for.
Yeah, it's a great point that you make. And it certainly felt in those comments from President Trump that he was more critical of Zelensky, certainly noting his lack of popularity with that 4% number in terms of the potential for elections.
That number comes out of thin air. There's no 4% number. Zelensky's got a 52% approval rating, not a 4% approval rating. They're under attack. The reason they have martial law is because this country's been invaded. They have airstrikes every day from Russia. I think it's highly unfair for him to be critical of the victim. He should be critical of the person who's launching the airstrikes.
And certainly when you think about, approval for Vladimir Putin, I mean, what are you going to say when you get the phone call? What do you think of Vladimir Putin? You better say you love him. So I don't believe anything on the Russia side either in terms of approval of Vladimir Putin. But what's your take on Ukraine not even being part of that peace talk yesterday? I mean, President Trump has made the point, look, he's been part of the talks for 3 years, but Zelensky makes the point that he wasn't at the table in Saudi Arabia, and he says he's not going to accept any outcome without being part of the talks. Here's what President Trump said about that. Watch.
They've had a seat for 3 years, and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago. Without
Half-baked
the loss of
negotiator.
much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives, and without the loss of cities that are just laying on their side.
What do you think, Bill? Zelensky later canceled his own scheduled visit to Saudi Arabia following the talks.
Well, it's the whole thing again is Putin invaded Ukraine. Putin thought he was going to win in 3 days. And he didn't. And why didn't he win in 3 days? Because the Ukrainians bravely fought back, and they said, we don't want you to invade our country. We don't want you to kill our men, rape our women.
This might be the first schism, I would say, within the right that might have some significant teeth in terms of splitting, the current. Like right now, there's a rapid, complete dissolvement of a lot of the institutions of the United States being done by the Trump government. A complete kind of like shock and awe strategy. And then going forward, if they're going to continue to do that, this might be the first thing that actually has a very large percentage of Republicans in opposition to what Trump is doing. Maybe it'll be an old guard versus the new guard kind of thing, which will be interesting to see.
And kidnap our children. This was not a time for negotiation. This was a time for them to defend themselves. And so there was no chance for any negotiation to happen. This was a brutal dictatorship invading a peaceful neighbor who didn't want to be invaded. And so I think President Trump is being very unfair to Vladimir Zelensky. It pains me to see him saying these things. I think that he should be supporting the victim in this thing, the democratically elected victim. Vladimir Putin has been a dictator for 25 years. He's taken over Georgia. He's carpet bombed Syria. He's done all sorts of terrible things. I think we need to understand
Lance, you're just one of the tankies who supports Putin. No, I've never supported Putin. If you want to accuse me of supporting the multipolar world, I've already, as you've probably noticed by watching me, pledged allegiance to China. And that's not because of the geopolitical reasons for it. It's because of the memes. I told you, their meme game is too strong. I don't know if you saw this recently, but this is Chinese redneck meets Chinese Trump in Chongqing.
Howdy, y'all. It's just so nice to walk around in the country without these toxic American politics. I tell you what, man, the best thing that I like about China is we don't have...
Who do we have? We have a guy who speaks English and Chongqing. Come on, let's shake hands. Let's shake hands. You want to know who I am? I'm the one and only. I'm the legend. A lot of people want to get
You're the least voice that I want to hear.
Come on. You want to take a picture with me? A lot of people want to take a picture.
I don't want a picture.
You want to miss your once in a lifetime?
Can I have my cell phone back?
Come on, man. Get back.
I had enough. I'm going to Russia.
小红书
Howdy, y'all.
Woo! And sorry, yeah, that's it. That's me. I'm part of the the top G.
Don't let this happen to you. Go to serfscoffee.com to order the only end-to-end owned indigenous coffee company that delivers blood-free, conflict-free, and cruelty-free beans right to your door. 0% of people who drink serfscoffee.com have exploded spontaneously. By ordering right now, you get 10% off plus free shipping, and it's the best way to enjoy delicious coffee while not exploding. That's serfscoffee.com, serfscoffee.com.
Attention everyone, this independent series is made entirely possible thanks to our patrons. It was produced by Anna Loves Riley, Arian McCarthy, Bobby Lasers, Cheryl Alvarez, Comrade Junkie, Doug Caddy, Everything Important, Hagbard Celine, Jimmy Sombrero, Multimongi, Omni, Political Papi, Preston Kroll, Quiet 185, Richard Bohem, Riley and Anna, Roller Dragon, Cernicus, Stellar Gwyn, Sebastian Demmel, and Words Greenwood. Not to mention all the other patrons you now see on screen. We couldn't have done this show without you. If you can help support the show, please check out patreon.com/the Serfs to unlock bonus secret episodes as well as get the content before anyone else.